Hey guys, in today's video, we'll go over how to install Flex Trim. Before getting started, I want to go over where the Flex Trim installs on the Flex stud. The Flex Trim will install in the center groove of the Flex stud. On this side of the Flex stud, I have a piece of Flex Trim seated properly onto the Flex stud. Something we'll typically see is the Flex Trim is not seated properly onto the Flex stud. If this is the case, the solid panels or glass panels will have movement within the stud. Once the trim is seated properly, those panels will not move. When measuring and installing Flex Trim, we always start with a vertical trim first. To measure for the vertical trim, measure from the top edge of the bottom track to the bottom edge of the top track. We want this measurement to be almost exact. If it's a little long, it'll tend to jump underneath the top track. If this is the case, we'll have to remove the trim and cut it down to fit properly. Now, since this is a finished product, we want to make sure that there's a nice tight fit between the Flex Trim and the Flex Track on both the ceiling and the floor. You'll want to take measurements at each trim location. With a Flex Trim cut, test fit the trim to make sure it fits properly between the floor and ceiling track. Also make sure the trim covers the panels. The purpose of the Flex Trim is to secure the panels in place. To install the trim, place the trim into the center groove of the Flex stud. Then, with your rubber mallet, strike the center of the Flex Trim to seat it properly into the Flex stud. Now, I'll typically come up about a foot or two from the bottom and then come down a foot or two from the top, working my way to center. You also can put some pressure on the panels to help install the trim. If the trim is seated properly, the panels will not have any movement in them. So I'll go ahead and install my other piece of trim. In the situation where you have vertical trim against a dividing wall, we use a wood block to avoid damaging the dividing wall. We'll place the wood block slightly off center of the Flex Trim and strike the wood block. Having the wood block slightly off center will give us space between the dividing wall and our hammer when installing the trim. With the vertical trim installed, we can now measure for our horizontal trim. To measure for the horizontal trim, measure from vertical trim to vertical trim. We want this measurement to be exact because we want this piece to fit perfectly between the vertical trim. When installing the horizontal trim, we'll use the same installation process as we did for the vertical trim. Test fit your horizontal trim to make sure it fits properly. Once it is fitted properly, use your rubber mallet and strike the center of the Flex Trim. Installed, there'll be a nice tight fit between the panel and the trim. I've went ahead and installed the remaining horizontal trim. The main takeaway from this video is because the Flex Trim is a finished product, it is extremely important there is tight fits between the vertical Flex Trim and the floor and ceiling track, as well as the horizontal and vertical trim. And that will be the conclusion of this video. If you have any questions, please contact our office.